of the competency-based curriculum and what it means for the Kenyan education system. My name is Winnie Ogejo. I work at the Institute of Economic Affairs. The Institute of Economic Affairs is a public policy think tank that uses research to inform, evidence-based research to inform policy discourses and dialogues. So for the purposes of our conversation today, I would like to, before we start, I would like to make a few requests. I know our cameras and microphones are off, and once we will be done with the conversation and we will be proceeding to the question and answer session, you will be allowed to unmute yourself and to show your face and ask questions to our panel. That said, I would like to, before I introduce the topic, I would like to appreciate our panelists for the day. We have with us Dr. Evelyn Jepkeme, who is an education policy expert. We have Amos Kaburu, who is a research manager at PAL Network, and we have Dr. Andrew Riechi, who is a senior lecturer and an education economist at the University of Nairobi. So those are the panelists that we have with us today, and we are very humbled that they accepted to join this conversation. So without taking much of the time, I would like to go straight to our conversation today. We would like to speak about the implementation of the competency-based curriculum and what it means for the Kenyan education system. Why this conversation? We thought this would be a very important conversation to have because of the confusion that is going on about the competence-based curriculum, with different people having different views. So with that, of course, we don't have a very clear direction on where we are going with this curriculum. So we just want to unpack it for us, and that's why we have these experts with us, so that they can enlighten us on what competence-based curriculum is all about, and in turn what it means to our education system. So just to help us understand, I'll make a presentation just outlining where Kenya has come from since independence up until now. We are having the CBC curriculum, and then what shift there has been from the first curriculum to 844 to 2663, and then now we break down the 2663 system of education, which encompasses the curriculum-based, the competence-based curriculum. And then, of course, we have issues that have been raised by the public, by parents, by different stakeholders, and then we have issues that were raised by the legislature. So we will have a look at a few of the issues that were raised by the legislature, and then we will have a comparison on what was raised by the legislature and the ongoing conversations and the issues that are currently being raised by the different stakeholders. And then after that, our presenters will come in and respond to a few questions, which I will outline at the end of our presentation. Then we will have the plenary session where you, our audience, will be allowed to raise questions to the panel, who will have an opportunity to respond. But in the process of the panel making their presentation, should you have a question that you feel you need addressed to that particular panelist, kindly make use of the chat box. You can type in your question and just indicate, are you addressing Dr. Evelyn, are you addressing Amos, or are you addressing Dr. Riechi? So that said, let us look at Kenya's educational transition. So after, of course, since independence, the Kenyan education system has transitioned quite a bit. We have experienced, now this is our third system of education. The one we are discussing today is the third system of education. But before independence and During colonization, Kenya's education was divided on racial lines. So we had African education, we had Asian education, and then we had the European education. And this was based on the colonial ideology of the level of intelligence that each of these races was believed to have. But when we gained independence, that's post-colonialism, we shifted from that to embracing the 7423 system of education. So the 7423 system of education was actually shared amongst three countries, three Eastern countries. We had Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. But when Kenya broke, when we left that system, when Uganda and Tanzania left that system, Kenya continued with that system of 7423 up until 1985, when now the 844 system was introduced. So under the 7423 system, we had 7 years of primary education, 4 years and an additional 2 years of upper secondary education, and then 3 years at university level. And the people then sat for the certificate of education, which was the CPE, and that was considered the O level. And then we had the KCE, the Kenya Certificate of Education, which was considered the L level. So we transitioned from the 7423 system of education in 1985, and we moved to the 844 system of education, which has served Kenyans for 32 years. So that's since 1985 to 2017, when this new curriculum was introduced. When the new system of education was introduced. So if you look at the 844 system, this was, well, it was only implemented in Kenya. Uganda and Tanzania proceeded to have their own systems of education. And then under the 844, we had 8 years of primary education, 4 years of secondary education, and then 4 years of university level of education. And then under the primary level of education, the learners sat for the Kenya Certificate of Primary Education, and then the secondary level learners sat for the Kenya Certificate of Secondary Education. And if you notice, the pre-primary was not incorporated in the 844 system of education. They just considered it from primary up to the university level. Then we transitioned now from 844 to the 2663 system of education. And there are some distinct differences that we note, even as we're implementing this new system of education, which encompasses the competency-based curriculum. So if you look at the 844 system of education, there was no distinction between the system and the curriculum. So for the 2663 system of education, we know 2663 is a system, and then the competency-based is the curriculum. So we're having the competence-based curriculum. So for 844, there was no clear distinction. And then 844 was more focused on, it was more summative, it was more focused on summative evaluation or assessments, and that's why we had KCPE and KCAC. So for the 2663 system of education, there's a mix of the formative assessment and the summative, right? So we are looking at the learner's ability. What are the strengths of the learner and what are the weaknesses of the learner? So the teacher who is guiding that learner is able to identify with that student and notice where the child needs more monitoring, and then comes in to see how to help that learner. And there is more practice to what they're learning, right? Then 844 was more teacher-centered, but what we're seeing with the 2663 system of education, we're seeing a more hands-on system where schools try to connect to the community and industry to allow the learners gain skills related to the real world. So we are having learners coming back home and they have to do certain certain activities that they can actually identify within their community. So for instance, if you have a learner like I do in PP2 and they're coming home and they want you've been requested to for instance help the learner have water in a basin and fill water in a bottle, that is very, very practical. Things that we didn't really experience. I'm a product of the 844 system, and those are some things that we really didn't experience. And then 844 was more heavy on content. It was about how much have you grasped from a lesson. But under the the 2663 system, it is more interactive. Learners are actually encouraged to learn amongst themselves together. It's more collaborative, and those skills that they are actually learning, you see them putting it into practice a bit more. So having looked at those differences, let's now delve into the 2663 system of education, where now the CBC curriculum is existent. So this system came about because there was the change was necessitated by the country's need for an education and training system that facilitates for alternative pathways. So when we are speaking about alternative pathways, we are not saying that now we are really focused on academics. Based on the child or based on the learner's capability and abilities, the learner can choose to go the academics way, the vocational way, the vocational and technical training way, or the skills development way. And the teacher in this case is encouraged to help the learner identify which pathway would actually suit their capability and abilities. And then there was also the need to have an education that is responding to the demands in the labor market. So you can see if a child goes the academic way, they'll fit somewhere within the labor market. If they go to the skills development again, there is a place for them within the labor market. If they decide to go the vocational and the training, the technical training direction, again, there is something for them within the labor market. So as we're looking at that, what necessitated this, there are also issues of relevance, inclusivity, and quality. And this is where there's questions being raised. Well, we're looking at relevance, inclusivity, and quality. Are we actually achieving this, or are we widening these gaps that are probably already in existence, right? So if you're looking at inclusivity, for example, a learner in my village in Asembo and a learner in this urban setup, are we considering that they're getting the same value, right? Or are we widening that gap? And these are some of the issues that I'm sure our panel will be looking into. So this 2663 system of education incorporates the pre-primary learners into the education system, something that was not there with the 844. And then, so we have 2 years of pre-primary, we have 3 years of lower primary and 3 years of upper primary, which forms the first 6. And then we have 3 years of lower secondary and 3 years of senior secondary, which forms the next 6. And then we have 3 years under tertiary education. And as we are implementing this, the major components that we are looking at, we have the competency of the learner, we have are we building the character of the learner, and are we working on the creativity of that learner? And to help us understand whether these are being actually developed, the competency, character, and creativity, we have certain competencies that we look at. So in terms of communication and collaboration, when a learner is being introduced to communication and collaboration as a competency, we are looking under communication. Can the learner communicate with accuracy, clarity, coherence to what they're saying, effectiveness, and appropriateness? Those are just some few elements within the communication bracket. And then when we are looking at collaboration, we are looking at, is the learner able to work together with fellow learners, right? So And is the learner also able, as they're collaborating, are they learning something from each other? And then when you're looking at critical thinking and problem solving skills, the learner is empowered to have an avoidance of subjectivity. And then they're also encouraged to use logic and evidence to arrive at a conclusion. So we're just not saying the learner is actually arriving at conclusions after serious thinking of that concept. And then, of course, they're also given an opportunity to explore new ways of doing things. When you're looking at the citizenship aspect, the learner is is empowered with the knowledge on the rights and privileges and duties or as a citizen. So they are citizens definitely, so they're empowered with these skills. And then this also gives them a sense of belonging. They identify with Kenya as their country. So when you're looking at learning to learn, they're learning to do things, and in the process of learning to do things, there's something else they're learning. So that's the concept of them learning to learn. There is learning, you learn something, but as you're learning the new concept, what else are you learning? So there is the learning of the concept, and there is another lesson to be learned as well. And then self-efficiency, of course, self-efficiency comes with issues of better self-esteem, their confidence levels are improved, their personal integrity is also empowered, and then there's elements of self-awareness. And then when you're looking at digital literacy, the learner is empowered with knowledge and skills necessary to effectively and safely use the different ranges of digital content and devices that are availed to them, right? And then there has been conversations that have been going around, and people have been raising a few issues about this competency-based curriculum. So looking at the issues that were raised, let's have a comparison. Let's also look at the issues that were raised by the legislature. So under the competency-based curriculum framework, certain issues were raised, and I've listed them, but we won't go into all of them. For instance, if you're looking at the pilot study of the CBC implementation, the challenges and the lessons that were learned. So the legislature was raising issues on the pilot study report. So based on the implementation of the CBC, what were the challenges that were raised, that they picked during the pilot, and what are some of the lessons that were learned during that pilot as well? And based on these few things, what changes were then made based on that now influenced how we are implementing the competence-based curriculum? Because there are few issues that we feel must have been identified under the piloting, but probably were not addressed, and that is why we are still struggling with some of those issues. And then if you look at the progression pathway, so what's the link between CBC, TVETs, and universities? We are at the moment where we are implementing for basic education. When we move to secondary education, and then we move to tertiary level of education, how do we transition from basic to TVET and to universities? And are the TVET and universities ready to embrace that child who is currently under the CBC curriculum, right? And then even as we are looking at that, we know that the last learners under 844 will be doing their Form 4 in 2027, and then the first learner will be doing their Form 4 under CBC in 2028. But before we look at that, are we ready for that transition? Are teachers well equipped? Are learners going to be well equipped for that transition? And then in terms of monitoring and evaluation, there was no provision for an effective and efficient system to monitor and evaluate the performance of the education programs in terms of the outcomes. So there are stipulated outcomes that have been laid out under the CBC curriculum. But based on that, if we were to use that monitoring and evaluation system, is it effective enough to tell us where we are with the implementation of CBC up until now? So since 2017 and right now we are in 2021, do we have reports for monitoring and evaluation that have been put out, and what systems have been used to monitor this new curriculum? And then in terms of public participation, there is a lack of evidence as to whether the policy was subjected to public participation. And that public participation, who was involved? Because we have the teachers, we have the learners, we have the parents, who are now a very big part of the curriculum, and then we have state actors and we have non-state actors, and we have different stakeholders who are interested in the education sector. So were all these stakeholders involved in this public participation, and were their comments and thoughts incorporated when this framework was when this policy was being created? And then when we look at teacher management, there is need for more resources for continuous training for teachers on CBC. This is a new concept that the country is embracing. So we will not say because teachers were taken through 1, 2, 3 courses or 4 courses that that was sufficient. These trainings have to be continuous. So do we have resources been set aside to ensure this continuity? And then in terms of staffing, what level of changes are being experienced when it comes to staffing, putting in mind the new curriculum and what it entails, the level, its intensity. So with that intensity, what changes are being made for the staffing? And then in terms of legal frameworks, there are no recommendations of legal frameworks that require review to anchor the competence-based curriculum. So if we are looking at 844, there are already legal frameworks that were existing. So are we still working with those legal frameworks? And if we are, what changes have been made under those to ensure that as we continue using those legal frameworks, they are now anchoring more towards the competence-based curriculum? So based on this very quick and brief introduction to our conversation, we asked our panels to speak to the following. Number one, we want to understand what informed the reform from the 844 system of education to the 2663 system of education. And was it possible to have the changes we are experiencing under the 2663 system of education incorporated? So we are not changing from the 844 system, but we are just making changes within. And then, of course, we've talked to the public participation, and under that we are asking, were the relevant stakeholders prepared for the reforms? And I indicated the stakeholders we are alluding to. And as we are speaking to those, we are also asking, were the academia involved? Have the changes in the preparing teachers for the job market, have we also made changes to that curriculum for those teachers so that it is now moved from the 844 mindset to the new mindset, which is the 2663 system? And then, was the due process followed? For us to have gotten to a point where now we are making these changes, there was definitely a process that was required to have been followed. Was that process followed? Then, as a country, are we ready for the move from 844 to the 2663 system of education? And if not, what then can be done now that we are already on the move? Because now we're already on the move. And as we are on the move, there are lessons, there are challenges we are picking that might hint to us not being ready, right? And then in terms of where we are with the implementation of the 2663 system, are we on the right track? If we are not, what can be done? And with this change, what does it then mean for the future of the country's education system? Because this is a very, very big move. And with the ongoing conversations, the uncertainties, are we on the right track? And if so, what does that then imply for our education system? So I won't delve much into this because we have experts who are going to guide to open our minds and give us direction on where we are. So I'll just stop there and immediately move to invite Dr. Evelyn Jepkemei, who I had indicated is an education policy expert, who will speak to the few questions that we have raised. Remember, if you have any questions, kindly feel free to type in as our panel will be making the presentation, and they will be glad to respond. So Dr. Evelyn, you have 15 minutes. Karibu sana.
I think I will share my screen. Okay. Winnie, I can see I have a number of security issues. Can you please share with me my presentation? Winnie?
Yes, I'm doing that right away.
Okay, thank you. And as you share, I will go straight away to the presentation. So the first thing that I wanted to mention is that education reform is a necessary undertaking for any education system anywhere. So when we talk about the different changes to education systems that we've had in the country, it points towards an effort that is usually about the search for an education system that is more responsive, perhaps, than the previous one to the needs of the country. And so in 1963, if you remember well, we had the Uminde Commission that proposed a number of changes to what was the colonial education system in order for the new republic to be able to cater for its needs through the education system. And the reason why I think, and the reason why education is very critical is because it is both a social, an economic, and also a political undertaking. There is a lot of interest in the education system across the board, whether it is socially, whether it is economically, and certainly politically. And you will notice that just about every regime in Kenya has promised to do something about education, and so the change to CBC shouldn't be seen as something that is happening out of the blue. It is something that is a very common undertaking for different regimes to pattern education according to their needs. And if you look at other countries, like in the US, for example, you will notice that they too have changing from No Child Left Behind to the different systems that they've had. So so the shift from 844 to CBC, in my view, is a search for a more relevant and inclusive and quality education for Kenyans. And the whole idea around reform, you can see the different recommendations that have been made from Uminde Commission all the way to Odhiambo Commission in 2012. I wanted to focus a little bit on the COEG Commission because it was, I think it is probably the bulkiest of all the reports, and the COEG Commission came out to say that 844 was a burdensome curriculum, and that some of the aspirations or some of the targets within 844 were only in word, but could not actually be realized because of the challenges of resources that the country had. For example, one of the issues that 844 had was that the learners were supposed to build, were supposed to use their hands to build, and if you are a student of 844, you remember initially there were the schools were requested to build, and they built different workshops, and they built huts, and they built all these kinds of things. And it became such a difficult system to carry. It became so burdensome, not just to the learners, but also to the teachers and to the parents. And also the cost went up because of the resources. So the summative evaluation of 2008 had a number of things that it needed to see. Remember that the COEH Commission made its recommendations, and not all the recommendations were taken because the government at that time said that it did not have enough money to be able to undertake the changes that the COEH Commission was actually asking. And therefore, it took a few, it did a piecemeal kind of it picked a few things that could be changed within the system, dropped some of the subjects, rationalized some of the content, and so on. And so in 2002, the revised 844 was rolled out, which was actually, if you ask me, was completely different from what the 844 was in 1985. And so that curriculum had completely changed. The practical side of it had almost been thrown out completely, and now we had content, basically just essentially imparting knowledge, and I think because of that, 844, we begin to think that 844 is essentially an examination-oriented system. I don't think there is necessarily an examination-oriented system per se, but there are certain things that we will be seeing that have caused that high stakes be placed on examinations, because if evaluation is used as a sieve to decide who goes to the next level and who remains, then the stakes become very high. And so everybody is competing to make sure that their child is in the school that is giving the A's and so on. But in 2008, the summative evaluation that was undertaken was actually done in the backdrop of the Vision 2030, because the Vision 2030 had said that one of the things that the Kibaki government was going to do was to reform secondary education. And the 844, the revised 844 curriculum that was already being implemented was already more than 5 years old. Usually the evaluation ought to take place after 4 years. So while the summative evaluation was trying to look at how the system has performed, it was also looking at the system vis-a-vis the demands of the Vision 2030, which was the national development guideline at the time. And the results of that summative evaluation showed that the system was not actually aligned to the Vision 2030. And of course, there was the Constitution in 2010. And there were a number of things that needed to be changed within the system to be able to allow, therefore, the education system to be responsive to the needs of Kenyans as expressed in these documents, in these aspirations. And there are many other, national policy directions that came, the SWAP, the NESP, and the KESP, and so on. And all these policy directions then meant that the country was ready for an education reform. Let's go to the next slide, please. So then, as the country was ready to reform education system because of these gaps that were identified, first of all, by the COEG Commission, and then now come the summative evaluation report, and then the Vision 2030, and then the different policy frameworks from the Ministry of Education and the Constitution of Kenya. How do we judge that the country was ready? There were many things. For example, the Constitution of Kenya talked about the right of every child to obtain a basic education. I will just use that as an example. And therefore, that means that every child in this country, whether they are in Nairobi or whether they are in Taita or wherever they are in this country, ought to have at least 12 years of basic education. And that is a promise that the Constitution has made. And therefore, there was need, therefore, to reorganize the system in such a way that it would then enable the country to support educating these children and taking all children through basic education. And as a result of that, of course, you will remember the Odhiambo report that came up and talked about aligning the education system with the Constitution and made its own, its own proposals. And so when you look at whether the stakeholders were ready, we go back to the political agenda of 2002. We go back to the National Education Conference of 2005 that produced the sessional paper number 1 of 2005. And then you look at the summative evaluation and then the Odhiambo, the Odhiambo report. All these documents, just to mention a few, pointed towards a country that was preparing itself for education reform. The question, though, is that what was going to be the direction of this reform, and as we reformed education, what were some of the key things that we as a country needed to be able to look at in terms of quality, in terms of opening opportunities to expand access, in terms of making sure that education is gender responsive, and making sure that the education system is actually expanding the democratic space for all Kenyans. Next slide, please. So the process began. And as I go through this process, I just want to talk about, this is the process that KICD actually does follow when it is doing its when it's developing any curriculum for that matter. So the first thing, of course, is that as I've said, we did have the summative evaluation. So if you look at where you have monitoring and evaluation right there, the red circle over there, that evaluation led to needs assessment. So KICD went ahead and undertook a needs assessment. After that needs assessment, there was need for policy formulation, and for policy formulation meant that the policy framework would be created, therefore, to be able to guide the country in how the new education reform was going to be undertaken, the relationship between the different arms of government, the relationship between the different bodies within the Ministry of Education. After that, when it is very clear what everybody is doing, then KICD would then go down to doing the curriculum designs and then preparing the syllabuses and having them approved by the relevant boards, and then curriculum material development, which is mostly by publishers, and training the teachers before it goes into piloting and then national implementation. And then we start the process again of evaluation and so on. So the question that I wanted us to ask today is that was Kenya ready for CBC? Looking at CBC and now understanding what CBC is all about, I want us to just ask ourselves a few questions around, was Kenya ready for CBC? The summative evaluation report did not propose CBC, but it proposed certain skills and certain knowledge, you know, a conglomeration of knowledge that that Kenyans desired. For example, citizenship. I think Winnie has already talked about that, and of course the labor market, and already Vision 2030 was already talking about industrialization, and then there's values and all that. All these things are not new in CBC. They were already addressed in the COECH report of 1999. So this desire for Kenyans to see the education system foster nationhood and you know, respect for one another and all the values that we all espouse were already the desires that that Kenyans wanted. The question, though, is that at the point of decision that CBC is going to be the system that we are transitioning from 844 into, remains a question to me, because there are other models of education and of curricula that could have been looked into, so that we are able to compare and say, okay, CBC is the best for us, and we choose to take that. However, after the evaluation report and the needs assessment, the government made the decision to say that we were going to take CBC. Now, based on the literature that I've seen, basically it's essentially the same idea. It sounds to me like it's the same ambition, the same ideas, the same aspirations that 844 had. But then the question then is, do we have sufficient human resource? Considering that CBC is asking for a more learner-guided or learner-centered kind of pedagogy, are teachers prepared, and is the training that the teachers have received enough? I think we have had teachers talk about they have not received enough training. So the question of human resource is for at anybody's mind who is thinking about any system change, because it means that when you overhaul a system, it means you have to retrain all the teachers. And then, of course, financing. Undertaking education reform is not a very cheap thing. And looking at the where we are economically in this country, the questions remain: are we actually able to finance an effective education reform? And if we are not, will parents then be required to chip in? If parents are going to be required to chip in, we will then go back to pre-2003, where if parents are not able to bring certain things, maybe some money to school for cost sharing and so on, there is a likelihood that our enrollment rates will go down because of parents not being able to meet their the end of the bargain. Because if the government is not able to entirely finance CBC, and it is certainly a very costly system, then definitely parents will be requested to come in. The fourth thing that I wanted to look at is management. How is the management of this reform happening? I saw somebody asking today, why is it that other ministries have a spokesperson, and the Ministry of Education doesn't seem to have a spokesperson, and we keep hearing different kind of things from different places. And so, how do the different bodies within the Ministry of Education come together, and is everybody doing what they ought to be doing as we move along? Now, the policy framework. So if you go back to, let's just go back to the previous slide, please. If you go back to the process, you will notice that at the point where we are at, the teachers are not actually using the syllabuses, they're using curriculum designs. And the policy formulation, so the CBC was implemented in 2017, started in 2017, and the policy framework that is guiding it is the sessional paper of 2019, meaning that the the policy framework was done ex post facto. I think the other thing that I also wanted to mention is that the pilot that was put in place. I haven't seen the report myself, and it would be nice for Kenyans to be able to see. I would like to see it and see the kind of different variables within the CBC in the curriculum. How does the current teacher training and the kind of materials that we now have for CBC, how do they interact in a classroom situation? Do they actually give us the right, pedagogies that we are seeing? Is it really true that CBC demands that parents do homework for their children? Or is there a gap? And if there is a gap, is it that the teachers don't understand how to, how to frame the homework that the learners have, and so on and so forth? So the pilot testing phase should have been able to give us the interaction between the different variables in this curriculum reform, where we would go back to the drawing board and say that, parents do not yet understand how to engage under this new system, and therefore we need to help them. I don't think there is any reasonable system that will want parents to do homework for their learners, for example, and therefore there is that challenge. On the other hand, are some of the materials beyond the reach of some of the families? For example, if the textbooks requiring learners to go on YouTube, how many Kenyans are able to actually go on YouTube to be able to watch something and be able to gain some knowledge out of it? So all these questions are questions of, was the process actually clearly followed? Because if the process was followed, we should all be on board, and we should all be saying, if there is a challenge here, these are some of the things that we suggest that the government does to be able to lessen the burden of education on parents. But as you can see, when teachers are complaining, I know the Ministry of Education is telling us that all these things, everything is under control and all that. But it's like going to the doctor, and if you are the patient and you go to the doctor and say that my knee hurts, the doctor does not have the right to tell you that your knee doesn't hurt because you don't have arthritis. When there is public discussion about the challenges, I think it is time for us to be able to sit down and say what really is happening as educators and as people who love this country. We need to sit down and say, how do we reorganize this system in a way that is going to take care of the concerns that parents have, the concerns that educators like ourselves have, and the concerns that anybody who is related to this process has. Let's go to the last slide, please. And so the current status is that Kenyans are just talking, and you have seen on social media, but these issues that are coming on social media should have already been caught by the monitoring reports, because monitoring ought to have started already, and data should be collected periodically to make sure that the implementation is going according to plan. And when we talk about resources, do we have the necessary resources for all the secondary schools that we now have for the double intake after 2022? We've never had a double intake in this country at the basic education level. We've only had it at university level, and usually it is chaos. Now we are talking about basic education, where the population is way larger than previously. There's also the problem of who manages the new structure when the class 6 move on to middle school and they go to secondary school. Who will be the principal of that particular class? We have, some of these things have not been made clear. And how will they who will teach them? Will the teachers in the current secondary schools be teaching them? Or what happens to the teachers in primary school, and so on? And then, of course, policy guidelines and the policies and guidelines need to be as clear as day, so that everybody is on the same page. And then, of course, the big elephant in the house is public engagement. So the public is now engaging, but they're engaging without proper guidance. And so this is likely to create resentment for the system already that we can see has a few challenges here and there. And in my view, we need to be, I think the Ministry of Education needs to engage a little bit further with the public to be able to avoid litigations and things that we have seen in some of other policies that we've seen. Litigation is not a way to be able to solve some of these problems, but it looks to me like when you have this gap between the policymakers and the public, and nobody is talking to each other, you will definitely have litigation, and unfortunately, that is not good for the children of Kenya. So thank you very much. I think that is the end of my my presentation. That we need to, as we prioritize reform, it's important to engage. It is important to follow the structure that is already there, because if KICD felt that they didn't need all the steps, they could have just gotten rid of it, but they still have those steps. So why did they skip them? And finally, we need to do an unprejudiced appraisal of the system of what is working and what is actually not working. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Evelyn, for that very straightforward and clear presentation. I won't go to summarize it because of time, but at the end of it, we will hear what our audiences have to say about it. But that was a very, very informative one, and it gives a direction to where this conversation is heading to, and it's answering the questions that we are actually here for. So I'll just move on to invite our next presenter, who is Amos Kaburu. Amos Kaburu is a research manager and works at PAL Network. In the meantime, I can see Dr. Evelyn. We have a few questions for you on the chat box. Of course, all the presenters will get an opportunity to give their views on it, but in the meantime, you can just be looking at it. Amos, karibu sana, my friend. You have 15 minutes.
Thank you so much, Winnie, and thank you so much, Evelyn. We've discussed with Evelyn this on many occasions and also met on different platforms to talk about the same. So I don't have a presentation. I have maybe like 6 points to put across. And maybe there will be more questions than answers because I should start by saying that in 2018, 2017, and way back from 2010, some of us were in the trenches and were raising these issues. But the same issues which we raised, we were told that they will be addressed every single day. They become more visible and more evident. So probably the more things change, the more they remain the same. Maybe some of us were seen as pessimists, but every single day going, the issues that we raised, and Evelyn has properly articulated them, aspects of financing, readiness, and just the entire philosophy of reforms were things that we raised from the word go. So as I've mentioned, I'll just mention a few things. And Evelyn has correctly mentioned, the search for an inclusive education for all has been elusive from 1964. Because if you look at the aspirations of education, that education would play an equalization role and therefore become a mechanism through which certain groups of the society will be able to realize their aspirations, has remained to be elusive. And therefore, some of us argue confidently that probably education is not the equalizer at the moment. There are probably other factors beyond education that will be able to equalize the society. But otherwise, education as currently configured, it does not have the capacity to equalize. And therefore, those who hang on to this promise that education will equalize the society probably are asking for too much than what our configuration of education is. That is my firm conviction, is an opinion. Other people are also free to challenge it. but every single day I see that conviction getting deeper. Two, the configuration of our education has never been towards quality, but it's been towards increasing access. But quality is always seen as an afterthought. So if you look at the kind of indicators that we measure education, we talk about the number of children in school, how many boys, how many girls, number of classrooms constructed, how many teachers have been recruited, number of textbooks, textbook one-to-one and such. Nobody asks how many children are leaving school with basic skills, how many of them have functional skills as such. And if you doubt this, you just need to look at our results in the last 3 years. And 60% of the students finishing Form 4 are getting a D plane, D plus and below. Now, it's easy to say that they are not failures, but let's call it as it is. In the average standards, you have a D plus, you're a failure. And you're free to massage failure as much as you want, but that's failure. Because if you are to look at it from a different perspective and calculate something that many people don't want to do, and luckily on this discussion, we have one of the best economists of education in Kenya, Dr. Riech, who has ever computed the cost of failure in Kenya? Nobody does. In the last 2 years, we've seen students in national schools getting D minus and even grade E. I think we had about 124 grade E's from national schools such as Alliance and such. And I said to ask myself, what is the cost of keeping a child in Alliance for 4 years? And then this child comes out with an E. Look at the opportunity cost. Did we need to take a very long route to take you to Alliance to come back with an E? Or those resources could have been used in something else. So I think our education has never been configured to achieve quality. It's more about access. And we've completely closed our eyes on the reality that we just don't want to give quality. Because if quality was a matter of public concern, then we would even define our education to say children have a right to free quality education, and not just education. Access is good, but it's not sufficient to give our children education. Now, it therefore follows that one of the fundamental challenges that our education faces is separating between learning and training. This is a big dilemma that we struggle with all along. And we've always lumped these two things together. And from where I sit, when I look at the design consideration of CBC, which is a bit problematic, is the same challenge of wanting to lump education and training together. Yes, education is necessary to a certain extent to facilitate now the uptake of training for the skills needed to develop an economy. But then you cannot only rely on the system that is providing particularly basic education to be the pathway for you to train. And I want to give a very, very brutal kind of analysis. I don't understand why the University of Nairobi will be completely obsessed with grade A to allocate students who go to undertake medicine. Because what is so big about getting an A and you going to do medicine? I have seen institutions go to a place such as Strathmore School, which don't rely on KCPE results to place a student into Form 1, because they believe that it's for you to be a Strathmore fella is more than the marks that you got in KCPE. So the recruitment process will already have begun even like way back in second term, and you'll be taken through a series of interviews, ask particular questions for you to see whether you are culturally fit for you to sit in that community. So what stops our institutions of higher learning from slightly increasing the bar or even reducing it in terms of why is there overusage of KCPE and KCSE results for us to place students who are going for training? I think it's something that just explains the dilemma that we face when we talk about education and training. Now, let's also be honest and tell ourselves that the problems that we have in education sometimes have got very little to do with education. But these are problems that due to our economic models as a country. And I sit and ask myself, I've been employed for the last 13 years, not earning 50,000, not earning 100,000, probably several hundreds of such. And when I try to put down a small investment, 500,000, 2 million, 3 million, I struggle. Okay. I really struggle to employ 5, 6 people, 10 people. Maybe my wife and I have tried, I think now we've employed about 15 people. And the kind of struggles we go through. My wife is a certified HR practitioner. I'm a research manager. My PhD is in education financing. And I've done investment and financial analysis. And we still struggle with some of these things. What about when you tell a student leaving Form 4 to go to a village polytechnic? Let's call it, because even the constitution calls them village polytechnics. No matter how much you massage them and call them youth polytechnics, the constitution calls them village polytechnics. A student who has gone to the village polytechnic has come out with with a certificate, an artisan certificate, cannot raise 10,000 for capital to start a business. When do you expect this student with a 10,000 capital for them to be in a position where they can earn 100,000, 200,000, employ other people and such? Yet this graduate is competing with goods and wares that have been imported from China. So at what point would you be in a position to compete favorably with what is happening elsewhere? When the country is importing 80%, 90% of what it uses, what opportunities do these people have from when they have graduated from our system? Chances are very minimal. The environment of doing business, does it support local entrepreneurs and such? So you realize that however much you might train them, even if the media keeps on glorifying, we've seen a child in Muranga but make some helicopter and such. At what point will those helicopters become commercially viable so that that student can sell 50 helicopters to be used around? So it's a serious issue that sometimes we tend to blame the education system more than it should really be blamed. These are problems of our economic model. If a country is not very deliberate in terms of protecting its local markets through the quotas and the tariffs that are created, however much you try to push the young people, and those who actually ask young people to create jobs have been employed throughout their lives. We have somebody who is really holding on to a job, 68, 75. They've never created a single job. They are not employing 5 people apart from their household and the farmer. But they're not industrialists. You really can't place your hands on what they have done to achieve. So how do you go back to blame the education and say that this education is just producing people who are looking for jobs? It's not producing people who are able to create jobs. So I think we must go back to look a little bit on our economic models and whether they are sufficient for them to address what is coming out from the education system and such. And of course, the challenges that we are seeing with CBC, which is really going to get bigger because we've been told that the train has left the station. A number of questions I ask myself is whether really there's still a railway track that the train would be using, or it reach a place where there's no more railway, and what is the end of that rail track? It could be ending in an ocean. So one of the bigger issues that we are going to keep on confronting with for as long as we keep closing our eyes to this reality is the challenge of equity and equality. And 2018, we remember mentioning some of these things. If you're not careful, CBC will turn out to be a curriculum for the rich. If you're not careful, rural communities with all forms of vulnerability and its intersectionality. So I look at it and ask myself, just somebody put it on the chart. So you sitting in Kilimani, you sitting in Runda, who has access to a smartphone, you have got your laptop, an additional computer in your house, you've got a smart TV, and you've got high-speed wireless internet connection, and your child goes to a high-end private school, you're paying 100,000 plus, vis-a-vis another child in the village who is raised by a single woman who did not complete grade 6. She's a widow, she's poor, working on other people's farms. What chances does this child still have? So if you look at the criminalization of parenting as it's happening right now, because I don't think that we're doing anything better. You know, you're trying to blame parents for why their children can't study. I live in this city sometimes, and I don't wake up in the morning because I feel like I should wake up. It's not luxurious. It is, I'm living far away. I have to make a trade-off between what I'm able to spend on transport, what I'm able to spend on school fees for my children, and the rent that I have to pay vis-a-vis what I'm earning. Yesterday, fuel prices went up by 9 shillings. And I have to wake up quite early, so I have to work for long, for many hours, for little pay, for needs that are increasing 4 times, and nobody seems to care about it. And then I'm told that, yes, your work as a parent is to support your child to learn. So you're criminalizing even the little effort that I'm trying to make the ends meet. And I mean, so it's very, very interesting that a curriculum can actually turn out to criminalize parenting and make it appear like parents are completely complacent. They really don't want to see their children succeeding. I think that is the reliction of humanity and sometimes common sense, to really put it that way. And when you appear on national television and blast parents, mnatuambia nini, sit with your children, you're doing nothing. I think that is pretty difficult. I make a few of my submissions in terms of having looked at this and followed the reform journey, that the Court of Appeal recently reaffirmed what the High Court called the basic structure doctrine. And now this speaks to whether you talk about CBC or you talk about 844, in our search for an education that works for all. And the question becomes, I've been asking myself, if you went to visit your friend and you found the interior of the house was very beautiful, with very nice colors and all that, and you feel the same, when you go back to your home, what do you need to do? Do you need to demolish your house to build a new one with the same, or you could sometimes look at it and ask, maybe it's about paint, I could perhaps just reconfigure this house a little bit and then repaint it, or maybe even just do some improvements to it. And Evelyn really mentioned this issue, whether there are certain things that you could have done within 844 for us to achieve what we want, because what you want is a house to look in a particular way. So sometimes as a country, do we go towards fixing cosmetics by going to deal with the fundamentals, or sometimes you confuse the fundamentals with the cosmetics? So that what is really a basic structure of a curriculum that is needed, or an education system? Because the structure, just like the structure of a house, needs to be sound enough that it doesn't require modifications all the time. You can't keep on coming to break a house every time for you to accommodate certain things. There are certain pillars in that house that must remain intact. So I think even for a structure of education, it needs to be a little bit rigid, so that yes, a curriculum is dynamic, a curriculum is flexible, you're able to look at it after 4 or 5 years. But have we reached a place where maybe we, even in this process, maybe, I'm using maybe, we actually ended up to confuse the two, that where there was need for curriculum reforms, we still pushed to an extent that now we are asking even now for the entire fundamental. And therefore, this fundamental question of the structure together with the design consideration could perhaps turn out to be some of the most greatest undoing of the kind of discussions that we're having at the moment. And as I did mention, from 2018, the issues that have been raised, very little has happened onto them. We kept on saying financing will be an issue. What happened? We kept on saying teachers don't feel prepared. They don't feel prepared. So no, you're being pessimists. Okay, you're just being pessimists. It is not difficult to train teachers. Teachers are trained to teach any curriculum. Then I sit and ask myself, if it was as simple as just giving teachers 2 weeks of training, then did we need to fashion it as curriculum and education reforms? Honestly, why would you do education reforms and curriculum reforms that only require 2 weeks of training teachers and they are good at it? Why wouldn't you just have done it? We already had programs that were running. We had Tusome, we had Tayari, we had so many other things which were running. I'm really waiting. I've seen Usawa Agenda has just conducted a study on learning assessment. I'm really waiting for that report just to see what is it going to tell us after all the effort that we have seen. Tusome was there, Tayari was there, and my friend Evelyn did a lot of work on it. We have had CBC that has now lasted for about 3 years. Is the outlook the same, or is the outlook different? So unless we reach a point at which our outcomes speak more than the inputs, then it becomes a little bit of a challenge. So in my closing, I will submit that it's important that let's separate what is going into education and what is going into training. Because the moment we begin hearing these quiet nuances of children are not ready for the labor market, and I'm sitting and wondering, at my level, I'm still struggling to do my PhD, and Rich was my first supervisor for this work. And at that point, when we're having discussions, what do you want to do at PhD? Now I'll still be struggling in my journey. I did my undergrad in education, special needs, did my master's in project management, and to do some little bit of finance and all that. And then I sit to ask myself, when you want a 13-year-old to start specializing in our current setup where opportunities are not equal, the level of exposure is a little bit limited. What are you really doing to these children by the time they are 20, by the time they are 25, and all those kind of things? Maybe what basic education will just do is to continue providing a broad range of experiences to these children that are not limited in nature. So that if it's a child in grades 1, 2, and 3, what business do they really have to do 9 learning areas? Maybe they only need 3 or 4. And maybe in a way, it will also make our education to be a bit cheaper. Again, this is my opinion, because I sit and ask, I have a child who is an 8-year-old in grade 2, and they are doing about 9 learning areas. And I sit and ask myself, why 8 or 9 learning areas? For what? I mean, do they need all this? If you insist that all that children at lower ages need is literacy and numeracy and maybe some general knowledge, it could be environmental or what, maybe it will even bring down that curriculum a little bit cheaper by maybe even 60%. And then you can really have now these resources being also reserved for higher areas and such. But when you end up now having resources that are spread so thin, because 9 learning areas, that means that you have to timetable it for the whole day. You need to have teachers to teach it. You have more strain in terms of the teaching and the learning resources. And so at the end of the day, the resources are really, really squeezed. So what do you really achieve? So maybe we really need to think more about what do we want to give at the basic level, basic education, which will really focus more on expanding the exposure and the capacities. That's why we're calling it basic. In fact, Swahili gives it a very good term. Say, elimu ya msingi, foundation. You're giving them certain foundations. It's a little bit of obsession about skills at this level. Obsession with the looking at engineers in grade 1 and the kind of things that we're saying, yeah, we are excited because, I mean, they are likely now to become the future engineers and such. So that you reduce a little bit the investments that are going at basic education. You can invest more into children who are able to read, children who are able to be numerate, children who begin to appreciate environment within them. They're able to develop certain levels of critical thinking. And I finished by submitting that I like some of the things, very beautiful statements put in CBC. One of them has to do with the 7 competencies. And I finish by asking that, are the 7 competencies the same, or is there a hierarchy of these competencies? Because what is possible? You have got a vision that is very good, an empowered, ethical, and engaged learner whose mission is nurturing the potential for every learner. And I sit and ask myself, what is this curriculum globally that is able to nurture the potential of everyone? The society is unable to provide, nurture everybody's full potential. How can you sit and tell us that you have a curriculum that can nurture every learner's potential? Honestly, I sit and ask myself, did we pick any lessons from a constitutional moment where we put a lot of things in the constitution, and sometimes maybe start to imagine that there will be angels who are coming to implement the same constitution? If we have learned in the last 10 years that it's never that easy, why wouldn't we be a little bit more realistic in terms of our resource configuration, in terms of what we have, in terms of our technical capacities to build a progressive education that is capable of delivering something for everyone, that can give them certain fundamental points that are able to facilitate these children to grow and have a meaningful future, rather than sell them an utopia. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Amos. I know you've always been very passionate about matters education, and we really, really appreciate your insights for today's conversation. Again, I won't summarize your thoughts because I think they'll be, and you can clearly see that you also share some similar views with Dr. Evelyn. So let's listen from Dr. Rechi, who is also a very good friend of the IEA, and he's also an education economist and a senior lecturer at University of Nairobi. Let's just listen to his thoughts and see what insights he has as far as the implementation of CBC is concerned. So Dr. Rechi, karibu sana, you have 15 minutes.
Thank you very much, Winnie and colleagues. I am quite excited to listen to the presentations of Evelyn and Amos. If we were to stop at the point where Amos has ended, I think it would be quite depressing to some of the listeners and others who may get to know what we were discussing. I'm not saying what they have said is wrong. In fact, Evelyn outlined, I stopped, she gave a lot of information, including what I wanted. I had a presentation to make, but it's not necessary because she took us through the education development stages since we became politically independent to where we are. And I quite agree with him that, with her, that Kenya had every reason to change or to review or to improve the her education system. And she particularly noted in her presentation the Professor Douglas Odhiambo task force report, which contained a recommendation. And I remember having been one of the 5 consultants supporting the Ministry of Education, as well as the team that was involved in that task force, where there was a recommendation that was made that Kenya has to implement or needs to implement CBC. I think for some who may not know, that report is the one that the Jubilee government, I think, used to implement. And then, of course, other legal and policy frameworks have already been put in place. But I want to say that this is where we are. CBC is a better system of education, and I wouldn't want to call it a system of education. Rather, it's a way, is a method. CBC is about the curriculum is supposed to be implemented. The curriculum is the same, only that now CBC provides channels of implementing it in a way that it's learner focused, it focuses on competencies, and there's a balance if it's done well. And that is where there are issues, and I agree with my 2 colleagues who have spoken. If there's a proper balance between formative and summative assessment, CBC is quite good. It's digitally based, and if it's done well, it is likely to prepare the learners for life, not only for jobs, but for life. Because a book I read by the World Bank on investing in early childhood notes that investing in early childhood is investing in their future. So there are benefits that accrue to what is happening in the focus of early years of learning. That is preschool and the lower primary, that's the 3 years of learning. And if it's done well, it is a better preparation for future. So having done having implemented or having decided to implement it, CBC, I think there are challenges that have been noted. I am not disagreeing with them, but I think we need to find a way of continuing with the implementation, but address some of those challenges, engage stakeholders. Let's have more and maybe better communication. My colleagues have already pointed out, so that we can inform the citizenry on a number of things, the challenges that are going on, and how listen to their voices, but above all, communicate. Improve communication so that we don't see more of how can our cabinet secretary and the team, the top team at the top. I really sympathize with the way they are moving from one part of the country to another. They are trying. I think it reminds me of what one PS professor some time back told me, that they were doing a PS in the Ministry of Education some years back. He said that him and his colleagues were involved in what is called firefighting. And we need that. Of course, requires that we differentiate between management and leadership. If we embrace management, then of course we'll have things done through people. But leadership is to do with influence. We do the right things, we show by example, and I think that's what the CS for Education is trying to do. And to some extent, I like what he does, but I think we need to do a lot more. So I would encourage us to support the process in our articulations, in our sentiments, because Kenya's education system, I think, ceased to be an education system, but an examination system. And my colleagues have alluded to that, which is why we are wondering about grades. Why grade A, so many marks are required to join this career, and so on and so forth. We are still in the examination system. All right. So things have to continue, in my view, but a number of things, and I have a few proposals that we need to consider going forward, because my colleagues have just highlighted many of the issues that are affecting CBC. Is Kenya prepared for CBC? I can say that being prepared is a relative term. And had we started implementing CBC in 1963, when Kenya became politically independent, by now Kenya should be a developed country, all right? By now Kenya should be a nation, which it's not. Kenya is a state, right? Because the national goals of education, national goal of education number one has not been realized, that Kenya I mean, that education should promote national unity, nationalism, and patriotism. That has not been met in many of us, even the way we talk, politicians alike, and all other people, the way we talk now, what's happening in Laikipia, we are not in harmony. As we are different groups of people who, at times, like now, we are approaching the 2022 general election. We'll be speaking our from our groups. I wouldn't want to call them tribes, but our ethnic groups. So we need to forge ahead, but address some of the issues that have been highlighted, and they are quite glaring. The fact that CBC requires a lot of resources. It may not necessarily be that these resources are to be generated by the government directly, but I think there should be ways of minimizing waste, all right, corruption, so that the available resources can be utilized well. I'm speaking as a member, as a chairman of a board of management of a secondary school in the village where I grew up, and I can see with proper management of resources what can be done in in an education institution. Quite a lot. The support of CDF, our local member of parliament, is supporting the schools around, and the resources are well utilized. So what is required is this need to rapidly train teachers, and that, I think, is a big issue, because the teachers who have been given the responsibilities of implementing CBC have not been well trained. They were orientated by very able staff of KICD, and that orientation may not have touched everything, all right? And so rapid training of teachers. I remember in 1995, I think around 91, 92, 93, the World Bank supported the government of Kenya, especially Ministry of Education, by sponsoring a program for teacher training colleges, which were, some program, master's program for diploma teacher colleges. And it was a rapid program. Teachers were prepared to, at Kenyatta University, and they were sent out there to become tutors of those diploma colleges. So I think there's need for some mechanism of rapidly training teachers, including using online methods, and ensuring that the soon to graduate teachers from our universities need to be sensitized, to be given some skills on CBC. Let them know a bit of those things before they graduate. Even if they have a month to graduate, that's how serious it is. If I had the powers, I would ensure that all schools of education in the 70+ universities and university colleges, they need to do something to on their current graduates, students, especially those who are soon to graduate, so that when they go out, they will have some skills. They will have some skills to add value to the ongoing implementation of CBC. And on that note, I want to inform listeners that there's a project that the University of Nairobi, Strathmore University, and Pwani University is implementing in collaboration with 2 universities in Finland, led by the University of Helsinki. It's a project we started some few years ago, and it's supposed to be training trainers, right? Starting with those universities that are participating, and we are involving about 20 other universities who are participating, so that few lecturers are to be trained as trainers in so the project is supposed to equip them with some skills and techniques that will support the implementation of CBC on the ground going forward. It's a very, very interesting model, and what I'm saying is we need to train the teachers so that they can support the implementation of CBC. I know there are challenges, but I think we should not go back. All right, let's find ways of sensitizing Kenyans. There was a year I talked to one of the I think the director, the current PS for early years of learning and basic education when he was at KICD, and I proposed that KICD and the Ministry of Education can leverage on the communication facilities in some counties, if not all counties. You'll find in the evenings, like one time I was traveling from Migori to Kisii town in the evening, and at Awendo and some other places, markets, you would see posters, some huge screens showing what Governor Obado is doing in Migori and so on. So I mentioned to my friend, Dr. Juan, I hope that can still be done, that they can leverage, they can translate some of the messages, some of the information in CBC in the local languages, so that they can be understood at the rural areas. So that there's, what I'm saying is we need to have better communication. At the same time, we also need to learn from other countries. We cannot just do what this PS told me some years back, firefighting. We need to learn. We don't have to go to Canada. We don't have to go to Israel. Ministry of Education officials, KICD officials, and university top managers have done a lot of benchmarking. But I think we need to see what they learned being implemented to support the implementation of CBC. The other thing is there are issues like we need to address the energy sector, the challenges affecting the energy sector. Cannot be managed by one person or one body like the government. I think we need to find ways of using science and technology. We can, countries such as India have done, so that we can tap the natural light, all right, to be able to drill water, all right, to bring light in villages and areas of where Kenya Power and Lighting Company has not lit those areas. So we need to learn from other countries how things like those can be done, so that we can light up we can have Wi-Fi in the remotest places of Kenya, so that learning can continue, and so on and so forth. So I think I would be happy if we can maybe agree or discuss what are other strategies that can be adopted to ensure that the implementation of CBC is done better or differently and more effectively. We need to enhance monitoring and evaluation. The findings need to be shared. I was very, very concerned when I was told to come and talk about what informed the reform system, the reform from 844 to CBC, which Evelyn did very ably. And the second thing was, were the relevant stakeholders prepared for the reform? They were involved. The CBC was not implemented out of the blues. There are those reports that were, some surveys were done, summative evaluation of 844, and the findings indicated that we had to do something different. And I am happy that my colleague and co-presenter Evelyn Jepkomoy articulated all that. So I think to allow others to make comments or to ask questions, let me conclude by saying there are weaknesses in CBC, yes, but I think we need to find what can be done to improve going forward, but not retreating, because it is, when you look at, I would encourage listeners, those who have not read materials on CBC, go to the KICD website, and there's a whole link on curriculum reforms. And there are many very, very interesting materials that explains, because we may not have a lot of time to articulate those when they are available, and they can be useful. Like the basic, one of them is the Basic Education Curriculum Framework. It is a useful document that answers a lot of concerns that we are supposed to be addressing. So that's what I can say, and I'm available for further comments as we move on. Thanks.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Rechi, for your comments on CBC and your thoughts about it, which are that CBC is a good thing, and people should actually consider looking at it more in depth. And I've seen from the charts, we have people disagreeing, we have people agreeing with some of your thoughts. So we will just move to the plenary session, where we allow for our listeners to ask questions. From the chat box, I can see there was a very engaging conversation that was ongoing, and some questions that were asked in the chat box have actually been responded to. So unless you had a question in the chat box that you feel you need a very direct response to, as opposed to what you have on the chat box, please, at this point, we'll allow you to unmute yourself and pose your question to any of our panelists. So you can use the hand raising icon. Then we'll call out your name and give you an opportunity to ask your question, and you please refer to a panelist that you'd want to respond, or if you feel you need all the panelists to respond. So anyone with a question they feel has not been responded to. As Dr. Rechi, in the meantime, you can just be going through the charts to see where people need your input. So yes, Boniface, please unmute yourself and introduce yourself very briefly and ask your question. Boniface? Boniface? Okay, as we are trying to get Boniface unmuted, very quickly, I'll just look at the questions that have been addressed to Dr. Rechi, because most questions were actually made while he was making his presentation. So the first one is from Amos, and Amos is asking Daktari, he appreciates your presentation and proceeds to say, unfortunately, we are raising the same issues we raised in 2012 to date. They were never addressed. Secondly, communication is not a challenge. There has been more than a decade to communicate. What has stopped anyone from communicating? Thirdly, CBC has more exams than 844. And finally, exams are not bad. It is the question of how are exams results used. CBC will have more exams. So Dr. Rechi will request that you weigh in on that. Could you please, Dr. Rechi, you can weigh in on those as we sort out the other questions.
What if I had you well, I think if I can talk about issues have been there, and they are quite they are evident in the implementation of CBC, but we cannot say that because of the challenges being faced in the implementation of CBC, we revert to what used to be there. And by the way, 844 education system was not well conceptualized. It was hurriedly done. It was not deeply conceptualized as it has been done in the CBC. CBC started with conversations. I was a member of the National Steering Committee for Curriculum Reforms, and we met, guided the CS who was chairing the task force. The steering committee. We listened to the implementers, those who are making the curriculum at KICD. So there are ways of communicating. So the other thing they have said is examinations. That CBC is full of examinations, and yet we have pointed out, or I just mentioned, that one of the strengths of CBC is a balance. It creates a balance between formative assessment and summative assessment or evaluation. Assessment. Summative are those exams that come at the end of a cycle, like CPE, KCPE, KCSE, and so on and so forth. While formative assessments are continuous assessments, right, which are done to enhance learning, right? So what our teachers need is to be equipped, to be well prepared with the competencies to improve on how they implement those assessments. Otherwise, I think what I'm hearing going around in the nation, I think, is a reflection of teachers who are not well prepared. They are not equipped, and I don't want to blame them. They were not at the time they were being trained, CBC was not even thought about, and that's why they are doing things which are contrary to expectations, especially not in line with the CBC. So, and that's why I go back to what my recommendation is. We need to find ways of rapidly training the serving teachers and those to join the teaching profession soon. Otherwise, I think we need more communication of what is happening on the ground, addressing those challenges. In fact, if I were the CS for education or his advisor, I would encourage him to come up with strategies. I'm not saying they are not there, but maybe improve on them, of gathering information and spending more time analyzing those reports and addressing them through people, through others on the ground. But what he does is also good, that he goes to the schools. Although he's one person, I know the top managers of the Jogo House, being Ministry of Education, are few. They cannot run around in all schools or all regions in the country. So there should be ways of collecting information, analyzing it, and sharing the findings with stakeholders so that we can avoid a crisis like now, where parents are complaining that their children are overburdened with assignments and so on, which in my interpretation or my understanding, I stand to be corrected, is as a result of the teachers who are doing what they are not well prepared for. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Riechi. I'll go back to ask Boniface. Boniface, if you're there, please unmute yourself and ask your question if you can. Or if there is anyone else who...
Okay, Mike.
Great.
Okay, I'm getting you. Now, my question is this. Yeah, that the ministry said that now teachers have to go back for mandatory training, but also in the policy framework that the government is supposed to finance in terms of resources the whole process of the new curriculum implementation. Don't you think that the government is supposed to come in to extend its hand even to the private sector? Because we have teachers in the private sector who are teaching in private schools, and remember, some of these private schools don't pay a lot of money. They pay very little money, you see. So I feel that the government should come in terms of resources to ensure that even the teachers who are in the private sector, to bring them on board by financing their training, because if they don't do that, and remember, the private schools are the majority. So if we don't factor in the issue of private sector in terms of resourcing the teachers with and equipping them with knowledge in terms of training, then we are leaving a large sector of this education behind. So I feel that the panelists should also look at it and address this. Is there a way the government is going to come in terms of financing the training of these teachers? Because these teachers teach in private schools, they are paid very little money, and that cannot be sufficient to enable them to go back for the mandatory diploma training on the CBC within the colleges that are around. So I think that the panelists should also look at that and say, how is the government going to come in terms of financing the training of these teachers so that they come on board? And once they are on board now, we can have proper implementation from the teachers as the stakeholders. I think that is the question I have. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Boniface, for that question. I'm sure our panelists will have a response for you. Very quickly, do we have anyone else who would like to raise a question to the panelists before I give them an opportunity to respond? Yes, Tabitha, please unmute yourself and ask your question. Thank you.
I had asked it in the chat, so maybe it would be, okay, maybe I can ask it to all the panelists, but so I'm talking from the aspect of a parent and someone who is just interested in early childhood education. But the thing is, how can a parent help? Because for me, like the way I look at it, the way I was taught in nursery school is the same way my kids are being taught in nursery school. And I know there is so much more. There's so many textbooks out there by different publishers, not necessarily the ones in Kenya and all that. Like if you look at, textbooks done by kids in Singapore, textbooks done by the kids in British curriculum and all that. And there's such a huge gap in now, like the children in Kenya right now. Like how can we address that and fill in that space? And also the fact that there are so much resources online, yeah? And then again, there's very little access to the internet in Kenya. If like very few people, okay, I don't think very few, because there are always statistics saying, I don't know how many people have access to WhatsApp, and it's showing like Kenya is like, I don't know, top 2 or top 3, meaning that these parents actually have smartphone devices. Not all, but most parents have smartphone devices. So if this parent has a smartphone device, shouldn't they be using this for the education of their children, and instead of just kids using them for playing games and all that? So mine is just like, my focus is purely on early childhood education, because I think this is an aspect where it has really been neglected, whereas the rest of the world is working really hard in trying to change this path.
Thank you so much, Tabitha, for your comments and your questions. So I'll have the panel respond to the Boniface and Tabi, and I'll start with Amos, very, very briefly. Amos?
Thank you so much, Winnie, for that. I think I still have to tell Dr. Riech that I respectfully differ with him. Communication is not a problem over here. And that's why I get worried when I hear policymakers run to use this as an excuse that maybe we have not done better in terms of communicating. There have been more than 10 years. We've raised the same issues, the level of preparedness. If indeed curriculum reforms were as easy as retraining teachers, what is making it so difficult? Why universities not reforming and all those kind of things? So I think it's let's not take on such because maybe somebody somewhere has told us that change management goes with information sharing. I think it's more than that. The issue is, however good you are at oratory skills or however good you are at disseminating information, you must have something that you are disseminating, what someone would actually call content. So if there is no content, however well you package that information, it will still not solve the problems. And so however much you come to the public to tell people that we are going to do better, these are the flyers telling us about what we should do, what Kenyans really want to be clear is whether the teachers are in a position to articulate the curriculum to their children. And Kenyans are already telling you whether they feel confident. You've heard from a parent, they are telling you that they don't feel that their children are being taught in any way that is different from how they are taught. So how therefore do you address some of those fundamental questions as they are? I think I'll just re-emphasize to say that it is a little bit, we ought to approach reforms with some level of caution so that we're very clear in terms of what we put at education and what we are putting at training. And then a system, because training by itself is costly, training is expensive, training requires a lot of resources, and training requires a lot of planning. And that is why it's better to focus more on the foundational skills, particularly at the basic level, so that you're able to reserve the resources at a higher level where they are more intensive and you're able to have more focused, as opposed to what we are doing right now, where we want again to spread the same few resources that we have. Teachers, time, if you talk about technology and all those kind of things, it's become super expensive if you want to provide all of them up to grade 1. It becomes extremely expensive. So the last thing I want to tell Dr. Riech is that there is, and allow me to, for lack of a better word to say, there is a fallacy put forward by proponents of CBC who argue that those of us who raise objections are over-glorifying 844. We are not in the business of romanticizing 844. Everybody knows the fundamental challenges that 844 844 has exposed this country to. I want you to reflect on the point that Evelyn mentioned earlier. And she said that having done the summative evaluation of 844, and the next question becomes optioning. What were the options on the table apart from CBC? So that we're able to look at each of them and look at the merits and the demerits, and now say that of all these possible alternatives, CBC was the best alternative. How come it's always been a consistent narrative from 2012 that the option must be CBC, the option must be 2663 as a system of education? So I think there's a certain way in which we also need to be very, very honest with the intellect of Kenyans. Yes, we understand that some of us, particularly me, I could be a slow learner, but I don't think that everyone is a slow learner in this country. The question of being very, very honest in terms of what are the options to CBC that are available, so that people are able to debate them. This is the kind of engagement that we are looking at. And finally, let's not criminalize this kind of discussions. If people raise questions, people are not out to bring down government. Nobody is interested. Every society functions on the basis of having strong institutions. When we raise some of these issues, we are raising them because we love this country. It's not that because we hate anyone. We don't hate anyone. We are basically asking questions as Kenyans, and we want to understand them. And just to have the surety that where I am, all my children are going to go through this kind of system. Probably some of the people, their children are already through with the school, but some of us, our children are at the heart of this kind of system. I just want to have an assurance that the opportunities provided to them will give them an opportunity for them to thrive tomorrow. That is all that we are doing. So let's not criminalize public discourse, whereby if you talk, you seem to be an opponent. If you talk, then you are a sympathizer of 844. That is not necessarily the case. Let's put all the options on the table. You want to buy a computer, put all the options on the table. Is it HP? Is it Dell? Is it a MacBook? Then people weigh in on the advantages and disadvantages of the different options available. Then people are able to choose. But just choosing that it must be a Dell computer, and then when you are asked, you tell people that no, it's because we have not communicated well. I think it doesn't solve the fundamental problems. CBC has serious design issues, which of course we know where to take them. And we have also taken them to KICD and raised some of these issues, that these are specific things that if you don't address them, they are going to cost this country a lot. And I want to tell you that in concluding that at the end of the day, the efficacy of a well-conceptualized system is about how it's implemented. Otherwise, you end up with what project managers tell you, a white elephant project. Because yes, you conceptualize it so well, but what is the measure of conceptualization? The measure of conceptualization is in the implementation. So if you claim to have conceptualized something that is so good, but the implementation is facing serious challenges, how do you convince yourself, unless you live in a fool's paradise, where you're going to tell yourself that I conceptualize, but the problems with those who are implementing? It is the responsibility of those who are conceptualizing to also think about those who are going to implement. So let them not just derelict and say that it's up to you people who are implementing, think about creativity. You really can't have a system of education that is going to be dependent on creativity and people using locally available material. Let us be fair to everyone at the end of the day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amos. Jepkamei, Daktari, your views? Please unmute yourself, Daktari. Thank you.
I want to agree with Amos and also mention two things. I think we have not answered Boniface. His question was about private schools. I think I have observed a trend where the public sector, the Ministry of Education, kind of favors the public sector and sometimes forgets the private sector until later. And so these are some of the things that we are seeing now. And while and the private sector does contribute greatly to provision of opportunities for children in this country. If we didn't have private schools, you can imagine what our public schools would look like. So I totally agree with Boniface that often the private schools seem to be left behind, and yet they too need to be, to be considered just like the public schools. But I want to conclude by saying this. I provided information about curriculum process and policy making and all that, but I want to now give my personal view about CBC and about the challenges that we are seeing, in agreement with what most of you have expressed in the chat box. And so here is the point, that it is true that we even COEG asked, the COEG report demanded a change to the curriculum. Ominde demanded a change to the curriculum. All these different commissions demanded some kind of change. And as I said, it is always in search for something better. Better for who? Better for all Kenyans. And right now, as we are seeing, Kenyans are struggling to understand and even to appreciate what CBC is all about, because it is having teething problems. And here is what I think the problem is. The issues around what we need our education to address are mostly constructivist. They are mostly things like values, they're mostly things like citizenship and all those things. But to say that CBC is going to address the issue of citizenship and value and peace education and all these kinds of things that we normally call soft skills is not true, because theoretically, CBC is a behaviorist approach. It is an approach to education that says you must observe everything that the child is doing to be able to know that that child has learned. And so we can't observe values. There are certain values that are not observable. So I feel that fundamentally, there is a problem in the aspirations that we want and the kind of structure that we are rolling out, the kind of system that we are rolling out. And most importantly, what was so difficult in implementing CBC within the structure that we already have, where you have 8 years of primary. All we needed to do was to integrate ECD into primary education, and you have 12 years of basic education. Now, to take the class 6, after the class 6 to the next school, the next secondary school, and these too many segments that are coming in a country that is as poor as Kenya, how did we even think that the economy is going to support that? So, and the fallacy that when we implement CBC effectively, no child is going to struggle for work opportunities. But work opportunities are not a product, they are not a factor of an education system, they are a factor of the economy. So it doesn't matter how good the education system is if the economy is struggling. And right now we have an economy that is struggling, and we are rolling out a very expensive system. And we are telling Kenyans that this system is going to support your children to get jobs in future. And we know that is not true. So I think it's important that we really come down to the ground and say, if we really love this country, what kind of education do we want? And in my view, I don't think CBC would be my first choice. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Evelyn, for your comments. Julius Ngigi has had his hand raised for quite a bit, so we'll have him ask the final question, and then we'll have all the panelists respond to that question as they also give their closing remarks. So Julius, please ask your question so that we can finalize on this. Julius?
Yeah, thank you so much for the discussion I've followed, and it has been so insightful. So my question has been, or I've been trying to reflect on the role of CBC in being an equalizer, factoring in the cases of the different kind of learners that we're having in our country. We have learners, for example, those who are in Nairobi and those who are in Turkana. Personally, I'm in Turkana. And I try to see implementation of the CBC becomes, it's like it's bringing the kind of inequalities, because having the enough resources, having the enough even capacity for the teachers, it's not well addressed to. So my question is this CBC trying, is it going to bridge the gap of inequalities that we are facing, or is it going now to have a system that is
Thank you so much, Julius, for your question. So I'll ask our panel to respond, and as they respond, I'll request that because of time, I'm very, very sure you would have loved us to continue the conversation, but because our time is up, I would humbly request that we proceed to have the panel respond, and then they give their closing remarks, and then yeah, so I'll start with Dr. Rechi. So Dr. Rechi, kindly respond to Julius, and then you can also give your closing remarks and your final views on our conversation today.
What I can say is two things. One, regarding the teachers, in private schools, I support the idea of Boniface, proposing that the government should have a system of supporting teachers in private schools. They should be trained. I support that. So what is required are the mechanisms of doing it. Otherwise, they are private schools are handling children of Kenya, and so they need to be supported. Now, what Julius has said, if I got him well, is is about the existing inequalities in this country, and which of course are hampering the implementation of CBC. There may not be a quick solution to that, but let's hope that with devolution, things will improve, resources will be added or will be created in those places. But I think my conclusion is, my final comment is, let's not think that CBC is something that cannot be done better. I think Evelyn went closer to suggesting what can be done or what should have been considered, and she rightly said, if we thought about implementing CBC through 844, that could have been better, but I think that was not considered. My friend Amos does not seem to have any other ideas or alternatives. And I can tell us for free that countries that have developed have managed, have made appropriate investments in education. And I think CBC is a good thing. What we need to do is to manage the challenges of implementing it, including universities being challenged to ensure that they respond to those challenges and they act accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rechi. I'll move to Amos. Amos, your response to Julius and your final remarks.
Thank you. Julius, the question of solving inequality is not an education issue, but it's larger than that. And I want to give you a case in point that when the Jubilee government was taking power, Kenya had very little in terms of electricity connection, particularly in the rural areas. It was actually less than 30%. But today, as we speak, there is power almost across the country. And that is one aspect of what politics and economic models can do in terms of bridging the question of inequality. So even if we wanted today to deal with the inequalities in education, we will actually not need to do any kind of education reforms. It's just a question of goodwill. We look at where do we need to put our investments in education, and 50% of the problems will be resolved. I think that's very, very important, particularly to Dr. Rechi, who really wants to personalize this discussion, and just to tell him that, Dr. Rechi, you can still focus on issues. If I want to give my alternatives, I know where to take them, because I have access to anyone who needs to know what are some of the options that can be considered. So I don't think that it's necessary for you to personalize this discussion. I have told even you yourself as a senior lecturer what some of the things that you need to do at your university. So for you to derelict this discussion to be that Amos is not providing alternatives, I think it's a very, very misplaced kind of thinking. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amos. We'll proceed to Dr. Jepkamoi. So you'll kindly respond to Julius and then give us your closing remarks.
I want to concur with my colleagues that have already talked about the fact that issues of equity in education have nothing to do with education itself per se. I happen to serve a community that is marginalized, the ASAL counties, and it's not just a question of education. Of course, education has to make an effort to be able to equalize, but marginalization, as you know, is not just something that happened in education. It's a political thing, and so there are certain things. As I said, there are things. Not everything can be solved in education. And education may not be the panacea to all the problems that we might have. As much as people would want to believe that, children should go to school and they can be taught about integrity, and then we will then be able to solve the problem of corruption, that's really not true. And education is supposed to provide knowledge, skills, and attitudes that will prepare the learners to be able to to make sense of the world where they're living in, and to live in that world, happily and successfully. And so, as we look at what is happening with this CBC, I would like to just request that the Ministry of Education stop being condescending towards people who are having different, views, because at the end of the day, these are the people whose country it is, and these are the people whose education system it is. And the Ministry of Education are basically stewards of the people of Kenya. And when people are saying that we don't think this system is working, it's time to sit down and listen. And we do have solutions. We can be able to support and provide solutions. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for your responses and for the engagement. I believe in every conversation, it's normally very good to disagree to agree. So I think we've disagreed on certain concepts, and we've agreed on certain concepts. And where we have not agreed, we can continue this conversation. This is a conversation that is in the public. And we need to continue with the conversation. Let us have a conversation and agree on what best works for our country in terms of an education system, and what will benefit the learners. And that said, I know we would have loved to continue this conversation, but because of time, we were not able to. We'll have to cut it there. But we hope that the conversation will continue even after this. And I'd really like to thank our panelists. I'd like to thank Dr. Riechi. I'd like to thank Amos, and I'd like to thank Dr. Evelyn for making time and for giving us insights and just enlightening us more about what CBC is about, what challenges are being experienced, what issues to anticipate in the future, and just jogging on our mind on where we want to be as a country as far as our education system is concerned. So having said that, thank you very much for making time, and please look out on our website for more of on our website and on our social media pages for more conversations that we will be having in the near future. And again, just to remind you that the IEA is a membership organization, so please visit our website and see what we have to offer in terms of membership, and join your colleagues who are already members of the Institute. That said, thank you so much, and please do have a lovely afternoon and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for making time. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a good day.
Bye.
Asante sana.
Thank you.
Thank you.